We're here with State Schools Chief Tom Horne. Tom, a lot of discussion in the world right now about the U.S. Department of Education, the role of the federal government in education. There's this assumption somehow that if the Department of Education on the federal level goes away, that the money goes away. And we need to probably give some clarity on that because the federal Department of Education does not act as a bank. It's more of a middleman.
Yes, well, the money for things like Title I and special ed and the various things that are paid for by the federal government is appropriated by Congress, signed by the president at the time, and a subsequent president doesn't have retroactive veto. So if the Department of Education is eliminated, but assuming the law is followed, the funding that has been approved would still be there. They would have to distribute it some other way. If they distribute it through the school superintendents for each state, we would do it much more efficiently than the federal government is doing it, and I can go in detail of that if you want me to.
Well, how would you do that?
Well, our experience with the federal Department of Education is that they're inefficient and often irrational. They occupied their building is an entire city block. And I read a news article indicating only half of them show up at work. So there's it's a cavernous space that's empty that the government is paying for. They put unreasonable demands on the state departments of education. Sometimes they, for example, with grants management, only one person in the state can have access to the computer connection, and it often doesn't work, and it's hard to get it to work again. It doesn't work well. They require representatives to go to Washington for meetings that aren't really that valuable, but extremely expensive to transport 50 people to Washington and pay their hotel there. When I first took office in my first term, in 2003, we had an incident where there was a legacy requirement that the federal government had set to the state that said that when you determine whether a student is an English language learner, you ask 4 questions, and that determines whether they have to take a test to see if they're an English language learner. I felt one language was enough. What's the predominant language of the student? But among the 4 questions was, did anybody in your household speak a different language? So we had Navajo kids who spoke only English, but they said, yeah, my grandmother lives with us and she speaks Navajo. So they would make them take the test. Some of them would fail the test, not for language, English was their only language, right, but for academic reasons. So they put them in an English language learner program, even though English was their only language. Some of them ended up in a class taught in Spanish. You can imagine how the Navajos felt about that. And so they complained to me. So I reduced it to one language. What's the dominant language of the student? So the civil rights section of the federal Department of Education comes down on me and says, you're discriminating because you're under-identifying English language learners. So I said, you know, if you want to influence me, sue me. I know where the courthouse is. I'll meet you there. And they didn't. And then we told teachers to, there are some teachers who are teaching English language to students who didn't speak very good English themselves. So he said, teach something else, but don't teach English to kids that don't know English. So they came down on me again. They said, you're discriminating against these poor teachers because of their accents. So again, I said, sue me, and they didn't. Unfortunately, my successor made compromises with them that I would not have made. But that's an example of some of the irrationality that goes on in the federal Department of Education.
So for the bottom line, we're happy to see perhaps some changes to the inefficiency and the silliness that we see coming out of Washington, D.C., decisions made 2,000 miles away. If there are any concerns about the flow of money, we're going to stay on top of them and have answers for that when more details come out. But right now, details are still kind of fast and furious.
Right, but on the assumption that the law will be followed as to appropriations passed by Congress, when reporters call me and ask me what's the effect of the abolishing the federal Department of Education, my response is the first thing that'll happen is that I'll throw a party, because we can do this much more efficiently and rationally than the federal Department of Education is doing it.
Thank you, Superintendent. And everybody is invited to go to our website at azed.gov to learn more about education in Arizona. Thank you.